And welcome to The Edge. Well, we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics with expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. We've seen a huge security void in Afghanistan ever since some of the US troops began their withdrawal. Attacks have increased and the Taliban is taking hold of districts one by one. However, the attacks conducted by the Taliban have increased not only in number, but also in collateral damage. What is the solution for that, and how can we bring all sides to the table to discuss the end of these regional conflicts? A war of words between Moscow and London escalated as both sides accused one another of giving inaccurate accounts of an incident involving a British warship and Russian forces in the Black Sea. Rising tensions between both countries has been fueled by several incidents over recent years. What are these, and what will be the effects of this latest tension for the region? And the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control says that the more contagious Delta variant of COVID-19, first identified in India, will represent 90% of all cases circulating in the European Union by the end of August. Because of its increased transmissibility, the Delta variant is a matter of concern for many governments across Europe. Most countries are trying to ease restrictions in the wake of an overall fall in new COVID-19 cases. Are we going to face stricter lockdowns after the summer holiday season? So these are the top three stories that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. The withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan plays an important factor in the Afghan peace process. Our following infographic gives an overview of the US troops' presence in Afghanistan. The Taliban have conducted a wave of offensives in Afghanistan's north in recent days, prompting the government to arm volunteers to boost the fight against the insurgent group.
The United States and NATO are pressing forward with their final withdrawal from Afghanistan. The Taliban, however, have made quick gains in Afghanistan's north in recent days. The militants are overrunning multiple districts, some of them reportedly with barely a fight.
But we're looking very carefully at the situation on the ground in Afghanistan. And we're also looking very hard at whether the Taliban is at all serious about a peaceful resolution to the conflict. We continue to be engaged on the diplomacy, but actions that would try to take the country by force are, of course, totally inconsistent with finding a peaceful resolution.
The Taliban gains in North Afghanistan are significant because of the transportation routes they give to the insurgent movement. The traditional stronghold of the Taliban, who are mostly ethnic Pashtuns, has been in the country's south and east. With the recent gains, the Taliban now control Afghanistan's main border crossing with Tajikistan, a vital trade route. They also hold the strategic district of Doshi, critical because of the one road linking Kabul to northern Afghanistan runs through it. As a result, a worried government this week launched what it called national mobilization, arming local volunteers.
For years, Afghanistan's security forces sacrificed their lives and blood for us, for our society and for our culture. And now that the 48 foreign countries are leaving in this bad situation, it is up to us to support them.
Now joined live from New Jersey in the United States by Mark Merowich, who's a political analyst. Mark, thank you for joining us again here today on The Edge. The countdown is well underway. I believe it's about 10 weeks left now until the 11th of September, by when Joe Biden has said that US troops will be withdrawn from Afghanistan. What can you tell us about the current situation?
It's a disaster, cataclysm, clearly. Let's just see what the factors are. First of all, the withdrawal is going to be earlier than September. I think the pace of it now is to precipitate a withdrawal by July, which was President Trump's original game plan. And what you're facing now is that the Taliban is basically taking over, I think, as you said, in your infographic, areas in the north where the Taliban has had difficulty. Now it's sweeping through the entire country and has already taken over between 50 to 90 districts, depending who you ask, with surrenders of Afghan soldiers with equipment and also slaughtering Afghan soldiers and civilians. So we have a very, very bad situation underway.
And indeed, one would imagine after 20 years on the scene, 20 years fighting a war, which is the longest, I believe, that the US has been engaged in the conflict, that a withdrawal would somehow be more organized and have suitable arrangements in place to make sure that things don't get out of control. But there are reports today of the US withdrawing interpreters, people who've been interpreting between the Afghans and the Allies, being talked to withdrawing them and giving them temporary visas until a situation can be worked out properly for them. So there doesn't appear to be any solid plan.
Well, first of all, I think the number that they talk about is about 18,000, not just interpreters, but contractors and friends of the United States who work with our soldiers there, who will be in mortal peril of their lives if the Taliban takes over. Indeed, President Ghani, I think, is meeting or has met with President Biden today, and the Taliban's attitude was pointless. Why bother? And they don't want to even pursue the peace process that they entered into. So what you're facing is another Vietnam. What happened in Vietnam? The United States in North was coming down and taking over the South. The United States pulled out, literally pulling people from rooftops into helicopters to try to evacuate them. And many of our friends who helped the United States remained behind and faced similar consequences to what the friends of the United States will face if the Taliban takes over here. And they look like they are taking over. The only thing that remains, candidly, is the issue of who is going to patrol the Kabul airport. And there, Turkey, I believe, has said they will do it, but the Taliban says they don't want them to do it. I think they have troops there at the present time. Of course, Turkey is part of the ISAF NATO troops, and that would be a great contribution by Turkey. So as you can see, all these factors are coming together, and then when the United States pulls out, then Al-Qaeda will come in again. So, they don't call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires without a reason. The Afghanis defeated the British, the Russians, and now the United States have pulled out, and so we end up with a vacuum and a cataclysm, and our friends hopefully not left in the lurch.
As you say, one of the key players on the ground in Afghanistan is Turkey, and Defence Minister Hulusi Akar has said again today that he wants to leave an environment of peace, security, and stability. Turkey's role in Afghanistan has been largely non-combatant until now, and the way forward would be as a proposed way forward, I imagine, is as a security force at the airport. Is that how you read it?
Kabul Airport is the lifeline to the world. It's the only way to keep embassies, diplomatic personnel of all these different countries there. If you don't have that airport, nobody can get out. And indeed, this issue of Afghanistan came up as a very important point in the summit meeting between President Erdogan and President Biden. That was indeed one of the subjects that was highlighted by American negotiators, and I think by the President Biden, that Turkey was going to be helpful in this respect. And I think that is important as a patchwork to help U.S.-Turkish relations. So again, the Turkey is showing its ability to be an important regional player and to help the United States in this respect, because pulling out and letting the airport fall, I think, is a no-starter. That just can't happen, because then you will not have. Now, my point would be, just as an aside, what happens? Turkey is protecting the airport, but what happens if you have a storming of a U.S. embassy or another Western embassy by the Taliban, as we saw in Iran? How are we going to deal with that? It's frightening, and I don't know that the diplomats here have really thought about addressing that. Nor, by the way, did the diplomats address that in Iran. They really didn't look at that issue sufficiently if you drill down and look at it. So I think they're trying to get out, and why? It's domestic politics. Biden and foreign policy. Biden has a lot of issues on his bucket list, on his agenda. And this is one he's got to get off the plate and out of, because it is, again, it's a graveyard issue, and it's just going to continue to sap the United States. And he needs to focus on China, Russia, and domestic issues. That's where his thinking is. And this one, he wants to take off his plate, just like Trump did. So, so in that respect, they're pretty much pursuing the same approach.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, whilst in several respects, Biden has, or whoever the leader of the U.S. Was and will be, has a good point. They have other battles to look at. This has been dragging on for 20 years, but at the same time, they can't. No one can just cross their fingers and hope for the best. And this, of course, is why Turkey, I imagine, is looking for some sort of guarantees that it will have support for the very reasons that you've just been stating.
I think, Andy, the best scenario here is the following components. Component number one, we get out our friends and give them visas. I think they're going to take them to Guam as a temporary point, get them out, and put them into safety. That's number one. Number two, Turkey giving its pivotal role to protect the airport so that embassies and diplomats continue to function. And United States support still for the Afghan army and Afghan, Air Force and so forth. We don't know how that's concretized, but that's essential. It's hard to do that from a distance. So it really is, these components is getting a best case scenario in a really bad situation. Now, that's how I see it.
One of the interesting things in the report that we showed just before we came to you is that the Afghan government is arming volunteers to boost the fight against the Taliban. This in itself carries many risks, I imagine.
Well, look, arming volunteers, let's think about that, right? These are not, the United States has been working with the Afghan army and military for years, training them, and, and they're very valiant fighters. And, I even had an Afghani student in one of my classes, in graduate class. The thing that's very sad here is that many of the Afghanis that you see living in Kabul in secular thinking, and particularly women's rights. You have women going to school, women achieving careers, all of these. Now, you notice that recently the Taliban attacked a girls' school. The fact is that the Taliban is going to take Afghanistan back 10,000 years. In the meantime, the United States was working with the military, with the society, to try to bring it forward so they could protect themselves and have an opportunity to have a decent life, civilized life, and it looks like that's going to be gone, and that's pretty darn shameful. But on the other hand, the other thing I should say, by the way, the United States, when it announced a date certain for withdrawal, that was, I think, not a prudent decision, because some years ago, when the Congress passed the law to withdraw troops from Iraq by date certain, President Bush vetoed that and said, you don't put the date down, because if you put the date down, then the enemy knows what date you're withdrawing from. And so he said it should be changed. And here what they should have done is said, okay, Taliban, you want the U.S. to withdraw? You participate in this peace process in Doha. You do A, you do B, you do C. You allow certain rights. You allow, protect the friends of the U.S., all these things. And all of this has simply fallen away because of the rush to take the troops out. Indeed, we read reports of Americans literally dismantling all the equipment and putting it on these huge aircraft and just shipping the stuff out of there. That's it, everything, equipment, everything, just out of there and leaving the Afghanis with nothing to work with. That's very scary, and I don't know how you protect our allies from afar. Where are they going to protect them from? I mean, they're not going to be there to work with them. So arming volunteers, that to me is a scary prospect. Are they trained to fight the Taliban? The Taliban has staying power. They've been doing this, and the Afghanis, insurgents, have been fighting outside empires and countries for years, and so far they've defeated everyone who's tried to win. On the other hand, if you think about Russia, though, it was the United States that helped the Mujahideen defeat the Russians, and then the Mujahideen took our weaponry and then pointed it at the United States. So it's just it's literally a no-win. There's no win here.
This is exactly what I was going to ask you. I mean, the total irony of this, the withdrawal is set to come on the 11th of September, which is the day that everybody remembers as one of the biggest terrorist attacks ever. And yet here we are talking about volunteer fighters. And as you just said, Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, other groups have all started by being ad hoc groups that have been weaponized and then turned around and done their own thing.
Well, I think also about the government. The idea here was to work with the Afghanis to create a governmental system where they can actually lead the people and lead them to a better life, right? But according to intelligence sources, if the United States withdraws, if it does, it's going to, the government will probably collapse in 6 months. So the government will collapse. The Taliban will take control of the whole country. They won't be interested in any peace process. And they will literally bring and take away all the rights that the people have been accorded, particularly against women's rights, women's right to be educated. I mean, things like that are very, very important. Why were we, the United States was not just in there to, again, there maybe is debate on this, to conquer Afghanistan. I think the idea originally was to make sure Afghanistan was not a base for terrorist attacks against the United States. So I think that what the American decision makers are thinking about is they are thinking that, at least in the short run, they don't believe that Al-Qaeda can retrench itself sufficiently in time. And they argue that if that happens, the United States will have to go back in and do something about it. But boy, oh boy, that's going to be very, very hard to do once we pull out all the infrastructure. But the potential for that, again, Taliban is very unclear on that, because they say they won't allow Al-Qaeda in, and that was the condition that Trump had with the Taliban when he negotiated with them, that they would not give a safe haven for Al-Qaeda. But are we sure they won't do that? We don't know. We're not sure. And that to me is a very, very dangerous risk. But on the other hand, at this point, we have basically washed our hands of this and said, we're out of here, and you're on your own. And I think at minimum, we need to save our friends, our interpreters, our contractors, our friends, and we don't want to have another visual of the Taliban slaughtering our friends and evacuating them from rooftops. I mean, that was just seared in the American memory. And, and we don't forget that, because you have many Vietnamese Americans who have come here and told the story, and it is a very sad and depressing and awful story. If you help the United States, we should be there to help you and save you. So that to me is to put Biden's words, the proof is in the pudding. Let's just see how the United States treats its friends. That's going to be important for all the other countries in the world.
And of course, we shouldn't forget it. It isn't just the local friends that need continuous support, but but also many of the US allies, including Turkey and other members of NATO, came in to support the United States when this conflict began. So it would be a shame it wouldn't be a good look to see them left in the lurch at the end of the day. We'll see where this goes, Mark. There's obviously a lot more to happen over even the short space of 10 weeks. Let's hope that it comes to a peaceful conclusion for all concerned. Mark Merich, thanks you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. Thank you. So we all know about Turkey's contribution for Afghanistan and the role that it's played in the past by operating the military section of Kabul airport. And now Turkey is seeking US logistic and financial support. Coming weeks will show what more is needed to maintain the security in the region after the withdrawal of US troops. For now, let's move on to our next topic to discuss the recent tensions between the United Kingdom and Russia. Relations between the United Kingdom and Russia have been strained over recent years. Our following infographic has more. BBC footage shows a confrontation between a British destroyer and Russian forces as Russia warns the United Kingdom that it will bomb the vessel if there are further provocations.
Hands fracture stations, hands fracture stations.
The Russian government is saying that it will bomb British Navy vessels if there are any further provocations in the Black Sea, after the confrontation between a British Navy destroyer and Russian forces there on Wednesday. This is video of the incident filmed by a BBC News team as it played out. It starts with HMS Defender in disputed waters near Crimea, claimed by Russia but recognized by the West as belonging to Ukraine. A crew member here.
So we're straight into the thick of it. We're going to action stations now, just to bring us up to a higher state of readiness.
If you cross the borderline, I'll be fired.
A Russian radio transmission warned the British to leave. Russian warplanes were seen in the area. Commander Vince Owen is HMS Defender's captain.
The UK and the Royal Navy, our deployment is here to maintain international order and uphold that for the global peace and security. And the Royal Navy and the UK will always call out states that do not follow international order. That's our mission.
Was it poking the bear?
Confident, non-confrontational.
I'm now joined from Ankara in Turkey by Gal Luft, who's a security analyst and professor with Ostim Teknik University. Gal, thank you for joining us here today on The Edge. The situation in the Black Sea with the British and the Russian ships is very confusing because there are conflicting reports. What can you tell us about what we know and what we believe to be the case from this incident?
Well, what we do know is that a British ship called Defender, sailed from the port of Odessa to Georgia via the territorial water of Crimea. Now, whether you believe that these territorial waters are Russia's or Ukraine, that is the crux of the matter here. Because on its face, the British ship had the legal right to sail through these waters. And at that point, things are becoming very murky because there is a difference of opinions or versions The Russians claimed that they had fired warning shots. The Brits claimed that these were not warning shots, but part of a Russian gunnery exercise. We don't know which version is correct, but I think that's a secondary issue. The real issue that we need to ponder here is, why did this British naval ship sail so close to Crimea? What end did this serve? Was it in order to make a point? Was it in order to make a difference? Was it a provocation? Why, for example, there were so many journalists, including the chief defense correspondent of the BBC, on board this ship? I think those questions need to be answered, because if it's just an innocent passage, it's one thing. If this is a provocation by the British Navy, only 1 week after the NATO summit, that's a completely different situation.
Indeed, the Russian embassy in the UK tweeted that HMS Defender turns HMS Provocateur as it violates the Russian borders. So obviously the Russians see it as a provocation. I totally agree with you that the reasons for this aren't clear and are highly questionable. So but as you say, the other issue is are these international waters, or are they? Does Russia have a legitimate claim to them? And how is something like that going to be worked out without creating conflict in the Black Sea? Because nobody wants to see anybody actually shooting at each other. So how is this issue going to be resolved?
Well, it won't be resolved because, look, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, what is called UNCLOS, is very clear. What are territorial waters? What are economic waters? These things are very clear. And the United Kingdom, Russia, and Ukraine are all signatories to this treaty. So they all accept on what the law is. What the disagreement is on is whether or not Crimea is part of Russia or not. And if you don't accept the Russian claim over Crimea, then it means that those waters cannot be cannot be claimed by Russia. And this is an issue that cannot be resolved. Now, you're asking a good question. How do we prevent this from escalation? The only way to prevent escalation from going on is to avoid provocations. And I believe that this was a deliberate British provocation. As we are talking, there is now a British armada, a British aircraft carrier sailing across the world to the South China Sea. Now, why would a British carrier go all the way to the South China Sea to claim freedom of navigation and to be the policeman of the world? It shows that it's part of a deliberate British policy maybe it's part of their way of establishing relevancy, legitimacy. I don't know what the story is in the post-Brexit world, but clearly something is going on. Clearly, I think that the UK is now punching above its weight and is trying to claim a role that it should not be claiming, like the custodian of the seas, or maybe Boris Johnson thinks he's still living in the 19th century, but he's not. This is the 21st century, and British Royal Navy has nothing to look for, neither in the Black Sea nor the South China Sea. And this is only calling for trouble. And I'm concerned that if these provocations continue under the guise of protecting freedom of navigation, it will not take long before fire is exchanged and escalation occurs. And I don't know how the British Army will be able to climb down this tree that he's climbing on.
Of course, it's a very dangerous situation, and of course, It's not just the British that are doing this, although you can some very good examples. Other countries like the United States and even one could argue China and Russia are also doing this. These standoff routines with this saber rattling between countries. This is a game that's gone on for centuries, I'm sure. But there is huge risk in the 21st century that escalation can very suddenly come. Is this the time for a new form of diplomacy around the world?
It is, but clearly the winds of war are already blowing in various parts of the world, especially when it comes to the Black Sea and the South China Sea. These are the sort of the two hot spots where I feel that the Western alliance is organizing itself for a confrontation. Wars just don't happen. They are caused. They happen through a series of miscalculations and provocations. And that's what makes it so dangerous, especially when we don't have sufficient mechanisms of de-escalation. And at a time that, in this case, Russia is already very antsy, very nervous, very paranoid about interference, about the Western powers' presence in the region. Let's not forget the context. We are about 1 week after the G7, the NATO summit, this sort of creation of this new alliance of democracies. These are all things that make the other side quite nervous. And
so it's time for everyone to take a deep breath and stand back.
Absolutely, and avoid climbing on trees that you'll find that it's very, very difficult to climb down.
Well, let's hope that the common sense kicks in, and as you say, wars don't just happen; they're caused. Accidents don't just happen; they're caused as well, and an accident can lead to a war. So let's hope that they do stand down and peace continues. Professor Luft, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. Thank you. Russia warned Britain and the United States against tempting fate by sending warships to the Black Sea and said that it will defend its borders using all possible means, including military force. Moscow also warned Britain that it will bomb British naval vessels in the Black Sea if what it calls provocative actions by the British Navy are repeated off the Crimean coast. It seems as if the recent tensions will continue in the coming days, but it's now moved to another continuing problem, namely the COVID-19 variants. COVID-19 variants bring new difficulties and uncertainties in the fight against the pandemic. Our following infographic has more details about the Delta variants. Germany's Health Minister Jens Spahn said on Friday that the Delta variant will be the dominant strain in the country during the summer, as it already makes up at least 15% of the cases in the country.
German officials say the more contagious Delta variant of the coronavirus now makes up at least 15% of the cases in the country, but they appeared upbeat.
Die Delta-Variante wird über den Sommer auch bei uns die Oberhand gewinnen. Das ist eher eine Frage von Wochen als von Monaten. Das sehen wir ja auch in den aktuellen Zahlen. Die Frage ist allerdings, unter welchen Bedingungen, bei wie vielen Geimpften und auch bei welcher Inzidenz. Denn natürlich steigt der prozentuale Anteil 15% und er wird mittlerweile wahrscheinlich auch da noch mal deutlich gestiegen sein. Wir haben ja wegen der Genomsequenzierung, die eine Zeit braucht, immer einen leichten Zeitverzug. Aber das eine ist der
President of Germany's Robert Koch Institute, Dr. Lothar H. Wheeler, set a more cautious tone, however, appreciating the delay between the receiving data and the progress of the variants, stating the proportion will, of course, be higher today. In Britain, it has already become the dominant variant. Lothar Wheeler, the head of the Germany's disease control agency, said he expected the Delta variant to eventually dominate in the country, too, and urged people to get vaccinated as soon as possible. Wheeler also said vaccines authorized for use in the European Union provided good protection against serious illnesses, including from the Delta variant, but it was vital for people to get both doses for complete protection.
And I'm joined from Western-super-Mare in the United Kingdom by Professor Parag Singhal, who's a consultant endocrinologist and National Secretary of the British Association of Physicians of Indian origin. Professor Singhal, thank you so much for joining us again here today on The Edge.
Pleasure.
And sadly, we're talking about the Delta variant again and how concerns are that across Europe that it's really getting out of control. And I know also the United States is also in a similar situation. Well, what can you tell us about why is it's spreading so rapidly?
So as we discussed in the last show, it's a global pandemic, it's a global problem. And virus is very unlikely to be limited to one country. It spreads rapidly. And obviously, we know a bit more information about Delta variant now. So a study led by Cambridge University has found that it is highly transmissible. But apart from that, actually, it is likely to escape vaccination, which is worrying. So the study showed that the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was used in India, is only one shot, is only 33% effective against Delta variant. And even with 2 shots, you're only 60% protected. Yes, there is still some good news that there is 90% reduction in serious disease and hospitalizations. But nevertheless, the problem remains. So we know about it, that it's transmissible, it's contagious, and secondly, it is likely to escape vaccine. So until such time that actually we see the whole global population being vaccinated appropriately, we'll continue to see this problem of emerging new variants and likelihood of more and more vaccine escape.
It seems to me that there was a time when almost week by week we heard of new variants. And of course, in those days they were given country names, but now we're being more diplomatic and going all Greek on it, ancient Greek on it. But the Delta variant has certainly taken the spotlight. Is that because it is the largest variant now, and it's sort of sidelined the other variants, or are there other contenders waiting to nudge in and even knock Delta into a different level?
So Delta variant, as your news was showing, it's likely to be the dominant variant in weeks or months to come. Across Europe, in India, it is already a dominant variant. And in UK, it is clearly spreading quite rapidly. And 90% of new cases are because of Delta variant. But as you say, new variants are emerging. So there is now Delta Plus, which has emerged and is actually spreading quite rapidly in India, United States, and United Kingdom. The cases are small, but given the fact that we don't know enough about Delta Plus, but scientists believe that it is actually more transmissible than Delta and Alpha. So once again, we will see explosion in the number of Delta Plus cases in weeks to come. But of course, we'll have to wait and see about its efficacy, about its how serious disease it will cause.
Mm-hmm. Now, the good news in many countries is that lockdowns are beginning to ease and that people are trying to get back to some level of normality. But in reality, are people mistaken if they think that this normality that the governments are trying to recreate for us is something that we can take for granted? And does it also suggest that people should also just be a little bit more patient when they're thinking about taking foreign holidays this summer?
You are so right. You're so right. I think people have to start recognizing that we are living in a new normal for the time being. How long that new normal lasts for remains to be seen. But certainly my personal view is, as long as the whole world population is not vaccinated, this new normal will continue. But even after full vaccination, yes, vaccination will help. Vaccination has helped, especially in United Kingdom, in reducing the number of hospitalizations and spread also. But still after vaccination, people will have to consider living slightly differently. And certainly patience is needed. And what we are seeing is rush for international holidays, rush flights, and all those things. People have to think twice. My personal view is certainly given this rapid explosion in Delta variant and possibility of Delta Plus also coming in, I think people should choose domestic holidays. But it's not just holidays. I think for some time, for foreseeable future, we have to continue with extreme precautions in our day-to-day life, whether we are going out, restauranting, outdoors, or whatever. And I think people are thinking, and there is a misconception amongst the population that just because they have been vaccinated, that's it, the problem solved, and they can resume normal life, whether it is football, outdoor events, close events. And one of the striking findings of that Cambridge study, which is yet to be published, was that they looked at infection amongst healthcare workers, so-called vaccine escape. And it's emerging evidence that a lot of healthcare workers, despite being fully vaccinated, got the infection and had to be hospitalized. Now, that's worrying, because healthcare workers constitute a large bunch of people who are looking after COVID patients. So I think this is in the interest of protecting the health systems across the country, in the interest of reducing the pressures on health systems. I think the public will have to show patience.
Well, thank you for bringing us out today. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but just to check with you, the people should still continue to social distance, wear a mask, and get vaccinated.
Absolutely.
So that's what we've got to do, and we look forward to a healthy future. Professor Singhal, thank you so much for joining us again here today on The Edge. Thank you. So more and more countries are reporting cases of the Delta variant, which are raising concerns all over the world. We hope that this variant can be contained before it causes disastrous developments in the fight against the pandemic. So, our analysts have provided their insights on today's top stories. Let's have a roundup of what they had to say. Before closing our program, let's take a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top story shared with the hashtag Delta variant. Here's what you've been writing on Twitter about the Delta variant. Amy says, no one talking much about the fact that of the 117 Delta variant deaths, 50 were people who were double vaccinated. Hancock has done his job. And Jeremy P says it's a distraction. Be angry that the 21st of June wasn't Freedom Day. After all, be angry that you might book a holiday and be denied going by the EU, who may want you to quarantine. Remember who is responsible for this? Boris Johnson, and allowed the Delta variant into the UK. And Jackson Montrim, who's a medical doctor, said the vast majority of COVID-19 deaths are in the unvaccinated population, especially with the Delta variant spreading. Please, please get vaccinated. And let's take a look at our video of the day, which highlights the ethnic cleansing in Al Bustan neighborhood in Silwan, where in a few hours Palestinian residents have only two choices: self-demolition of their houses or demolition by the Israeli occupation forces.
احنا هون في منطقة سلوان جنوب المسجد الأقصى، هي قدامنا. واحنا منطقة سلوان جنوب المسجد الأقصى، الحي اللي بيحمي المسجد الأقصى، احنا من هاي المنطقة.
بما اني انا بنت سلوان، انا مسقط رأسي في سلوان، بيتي ما بعدش دقيقتين ونص او 3 دقائق عن بيت اهلي، فهذا بيعني لي شيء كثير بصراحة. يعني انا اهلي جنبي، عيلتي جنبي، اولادي حوالي، فهذا بيعني لي شيء كثير. هم اجوا علينا جيان، احنا من هون، جدودنا من هون، انا سيدي وسيد ابوي موجود في سلوان كان. فالله الوضع يعني كثير انه يعني بوجع بصراحه، يعني من ذكريات بدهم يمحون لي اياها، ذكريات الماضي، ذكريات اللي كنت انا اطمح فيها لقدام، هذا كله بيمحوه، الحاضر كمان بيمحوه. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ان شاء الله ما بصير الا بالخير.
الاحتلال الذي لا يأبه لأي قوانين ولا يجد من يخدعه، ربما سيكون مآل 1500 نسمة في حي البستان، وبداية من هذه العائلة، عائلة نادر أبو ذياب، ومن ثم تتتالى العائلات الأخرى، سيكونون في العراء نتيجة عنجهية سلطات الاحتلال وأنها فوق القانون الدولي، وعدم وجود أي مؤسسات دولية تخدع الاحتلال، وخاصة أن 63% من سكان حي البستان أطفال سيبقون في الشوارع بدون مأوى وبدون منازل.
تلقى 13 بيت عندنا متلقين في حي البستان، زي هاي الورقة ترجمناها وشوفنا شو فيها، انصدمنا، لأنه هاي قرار محكمة وبالهدف، يا إما بنهد بإيدنا يا إما هم بيجوا بهدوا. أنا عندي في البيت عندي 14 نفر ساكنين في الدار، إحنا عائلة كبيرة، أنا وأولادي وأحفادي كنا ساكنين هون. إلي بحدود 5-6 سنين معاهم في المحاكم، أعطونا محاكم وإحنا عائلة وبدنا نعيش زينا زي باقي الناس. ما بعطوا رخص لأي إنسان عربي.
إيش الهدف؟
الهدف تهجيرنا من المنطقة سلوان. الدور هدول في عندهم قرارات هدر، فلما بيستلموهم مستوطنين وباخذوهم هذول ببطل عندهم قرارات هدر، بصير عندهم قانوني. عند اليهود قانون وعندنا احنا قرارات هدر. منطقة سلوان زي ما انت شايفتيها هاي كلها مهددة بالهدر. حي البستان اللي هم بيعتبروه مدينة داوود. فاحنا الوضع عندنا مش بسيط ومش هين، لأن الوضع عندنا سيء جدا، وبطالبونا انهم مده لهم اكثر من 20 سنه، بيطالبونا في اخلاء البيوت وهدمها ويساووا حديقه توراتيه للنبي، بيحكوا ادعوا انها مدينه النبي داوود.
هناك سياسه ومخطط من قبل سلطات الاحتلال لتصفيه الوجود العربي والمقدسي، وخاصه فيما يسمى بالحوض المقدس، الذي يبدا هذا المشروع حسب التسميه العبريه من الشيخ جراح وصولا هنا إلى سلوان بما فيها البلدة القديمة. حقيقة في منطقة سلوان يحاول الاحتلال إفقاد الناس الأمان النفسي، الاجتماعي، حتى الديني، ولذلك حتى مساجد في سلوان هي مهددة بالهدم والأمن الروحي أيضا. أصدر ما يسمى بقانون كامينيتس من عام 2017 حيث أن من بنى بعد هذا التاريخ لا يمكن التمديد أو حتى مخالفة الشخص بل يسري عليه قانون الهدم والطرد. ولذلك حتى يعني هذه المنازل في حي البستان الآن 13 منزل و100 منزل في حي البستان تسلمت أوامر هدم، ولكن 13 منها تسلمت أوامر تنفيذ الهدم، ومنها هذا المنزل الذي نجلس فيه الآن.
And that's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boynes. Stay tuned as we'll be back next time with more in-depth analysis and a look beyond the edge.